car this morning on the way to school, my kids saw me making the ad. I create that little thing that some of you get in the WhatsApps, and I was creating the advertisement, and my kids said, well, it's not only Jews who believe in God, and I said, absolutely, it's true. And you're right, because that's the famous story of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev, where his father-in-law asked him, so what did you learn when you went to the Hasidus Tzulu thought? And he said, I learned that God exists. And his father-in-law started laughing. He said, what do you mean you learned God exists? Everybody believes in God. You don't have to be Jewish too. And what he said was, no, I learned, I don't just say God exists, right? I believe it. I live it. It's something that's part of my life. And that's what we're trying to do here, is the reason we gather together, and these are the topics of our discussion, is because we don't want it to just be an idea, a belief. We want it to be real, concrete in our lives. And it should be something that we live by. So, if that's the case, there's a lot we do have to explore and learn and know and connect with. And that's what we're going to be doing today. Because if you look at our previous discussions, we looked at various different ideas. We asked various questions about God. We've been discussing this topic over the last 2-3 weeks. And the themes that we've looked at until now had to do more with the nature of God, right? God's resume, God's CV, call it. Okay? We were talking about the nature. What is God? The makeup of Hashem. What's God's nature? And even this week, what did we talk about? We talked about God's relationship with the world. But today we're going to segue into a different theme, and that is, I'm just looking for my page, we're going to look more at what's our relationship with Hashem. So we're going the other way. And it's very appropriate for this week's Parsha, because this week's Parsha, Vayetze, is about the ladder in Jacob's dream. And where's the ladder? It is firmly stationed on the ground, making its way up to heaven. So while there is a relationship from God to us, and we talked about that yesterday and the day before, how God relates to us, today, and maybe we'll have to extend this to next week as well, we will look at this idea of how we relate to Hashem. Because that's another important part of the relationship, is how do we relate to God? And what do we do when we struggle with that? So maybe next week we'll talk more about the struggles, but today we'll discuss that inherent element of our relationship with God. Like on the ladder in Jacob's dream, it starts off with the angels going up to heaven and back down. Right? So we're not talking about God's relationship to us. We discussed that to some degree in the last 2 days. And now we're talking about, yes, we believe God exists. We accept, right? We discussed part of the nature of Hashem. And we appreciate how much God wants to engage with us. And that's very important. And how Hashem controls the whole world around us. But let's talk a little bit about what does that mean to me? How does that make a difference? How do I relate to Hashem? How do I experience God in my daily living? So that's the topic of discussion for today, and I think we'll probably have to touch on this a little bit more next week as well. Today we'll look at is, do I have to believe in God to be Jewish? Many Jews don't believe in God. They do. I like that, Tzipora, deep inside. And that's what we're talking about, the inherent, the pinta yid, what's really there. So, while we're not going to get to this today, next week I want to touch on, is it kosher to have doubts about God? We sometimes have thoughts in our mind, and we have all types of doubts that come in. Now, there's emunah pshuta, which is simple faith. And simple faith is very nice, but I think we need to work on a little bit more of a sophisticated faith. Simple faith means I always believe in God, and it's always deep inside. But next week, I want to try to take it to the next level. That what happens when I do have doubts? Does that make me Jewish? No, nothing can undo the Jew in you. But what happens when I have doubts? So let's do that Monday, please God. And then we could talk about fear of God, because I know it's a question some of you asked me. What's that fear, especially after yesterday's topic of discussion? God of vengeance, God of jealousy, God of, right, all those things. what's with the fear of God? So we'll talk about that. And what about, I keep not finding my page in here. This is ridiculous. One might say, I'm okay with believing in God, but still I'm not religious, right? So what kind of relationship could we have with God if we're not religious per se? How do you know? Your grandfather told you. Good. So we have a good foundation for our discussion. And let's dive into the topic for today. I think there's a lot to talk about just on this very question about what does it mean to believe in God or not to believe in God if we're not Jewish? Yeah? Not right now, afterwards. Sorry. What, Arlene? Pardon? Yeah. Yeah, we discussed that last week. You certainly can be angry. And Moses, who was probably the greatest Jew to ever live, right? He expressed his anger and frustration with God when things didn't look right. So you are certainly entitled and allowed, and it's right to do that. You certainly should do that. If things don't, when there's pain, suffering, God forbid, all types of sorrows that we see in this world, certainly one should be questioning and asking, and why? I don't know enough about my own religion, so I'm not looking at any other religions. All right, let's talk a little bit here. Many people talking about religions think of Judaism as a religion. Okay? Now, generally speaking, a religion is a set of beliefs, right? So if you subscribe to those beliefs, then I guess you are Jewish. You are that religion, not Jewish, per se. Because actually I find the opposite. That when I drive by some of the other houses of worship, I am amazed, I'm astounded at how many cars are parked out there and how well attended it is. And yet, every day I struggle and fight for a minyan in my shul. So it's a little bit mind-boggling to me. In my shul, sure we have a daily service. No, they don't have a daily service. I don't know. Maybe the Muslims are sure have daily services. No, maybe it's not as busy daily as it is on a Friday. We get Yom Kippur once a year. Everybody. When I put up the sukkah, remember when we built our shul? We didn't build it. We bought it off a church over 10 years ago. And the pastor came to visit one day, happened to be Sukkot, and he says, "What's the structure you put up outside?" And I explained to him it's an 8-day Jewish holiday. He says, "For 8 days you put up the structure?" I said, "Pastor, we bought this building from you for 1 day a year. You're asking about 8 days. 1 day a year we get to fill up the shul. Forget about 8 days." They tell the story about this fellow who was climbing a tree or mountain climbing. There's different versions of the story. And he suddenly slipped, and now he doesn't know, he's falling, and he's grabbed onto some kind of a branch, and he's hanging out there for his dear life, and he doesn't know what to do. He's getting exhausted, and before he knows it, he's going to fall to the ground. He's begging, he's praying, he's pleading. He looks up to the heavens. He said, "Almighty God, please help me." And all of a sudden, the clouds parted, and a deep voice, resounded from the heavens and says, "Let go, my son." For a moment, he's silent. And then the guy looks up to the heavens and says, "Is there anyone else out there?" So, my friends, here is the question. When it comes to Judaism, believing in God, if you want to talk about what it means to be Jewish, or what are the specifics of the Jewish religion, I would say belief in God is pretty high up there, no? Pretty high up on the list of beliefs? What do you say? So then, of course, this is the question then. Does a Jew have to believe in God? right? Do I have to believe in God to be Jewish? Now, it's fair to assume that some, or even most of us, profess to believe in God. All of us. We can't speak for others. We don't know what goes on in someone else's heart. And plus, we have an audience well beyond just the classroom and the Zoom room and the Facebook. So for all the people watching us on the various platforms. The question is, are we correct that to identify as a Jew, you have to believe in God? What if I don't believe in God? Do we forfeit the right to call myself Jewish? Or are you only Jewish? Now, do you forfeit your right to be Jewish if you don't believe in God? Well, we have differences of opinion here. What makes you Jewish? Good question. Is it gefilte fish and tzimus? So he's saying if it's the Torah, then if you don't believe in the Torah, you're not Jewish? How do you define Jew? So that's a good exercise that I want to engage with you in right now, okay? Pardon. Let's talk about this. Please we'll take questions and all without interruptions because it just makes it difficult. So what is a Jew is the first question that we have to define for today's discussion, right? What is a Jew? And let's first determine what Jewishness is, okay? So I'm going to get you a little bit, let's take it. Let's look at some of the terminologies out there, some of the definitions. Well, in Israel, it's a major debate happening at the moment again. Mihu Yehudi, who's a Jew? Let's start off with this, okay? Let's look at the race, the Jewish race. Okay, could you say that Judaism is a race? I was asked this very question on 5FM recently. Yeah. And they couldn't understand me. The host was challenging me on it. She said, is Judaism not a race? Now let's understand, what is a race? Okay? If you want to say that black is a race and white is a race, or African is a race and Caucasian is a race, or Asian is a race and European, I don't know. I'm trying to just work this out with you. We have Jews of all stripes and colors. Go to Israel and you'll see a kaleidoscope. You don't have to get Israel right here in the Rainbow Nation. We have the Rainbow Nation of Jews, right? So let's look at the Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary for a definition of what it means. What is the definition of race? And the dictionary says that a race is a group that humans are often divided into based on their physical traits regarded as common among people of a shared ancestry. Well, as you can see very clearly, we all have so many different types of Jews. Yes? You know what? Let me just put these all up. Let's look at, what about culture? Could you say that there is a Jewish culture per se? Yes? Let's define culture first and then we'll tackle it and try to analyze that. Because let's think about it. You know what? Let's look at race for a second as well. Let me just, while I have it in my head. Because something that the dictionary tells us, that race is a social construct. Now let's just try to define and understand what is a social construct. Okay, so the dictionary says, a social construct is an idea that has been created and accepted by the people in a society. The consensus today is that race is not a scientific, biological, or physiological reality. Rather, it is a class system invented, or maybe rather ill-intended, by rather ill-intended humans. Or by? The last words, that it is a class system invented by, or rather invented by rather ill-intended humans. Hitler divided people into classes. The apartheid regime divided people into race classes. So this whole idea of a race, now it's difficult to define people based on a race. So, I mean, we all have the same blood inside us. Do we? Very good. You have Ashkenazic Jews, you have Sephardic Jews, you have Mizrahi Jews, you have African Jews, you have Jews of every type, right? So Jews and Judaism is one that also cannot be limited to and defined strictly as a race, okay? Now let's assume the typical constructs, right? Black and white, European and African, all those differences, right? Those structures that were invented by humans to distinguish between fellow Homo sapiens. But as you're explicitly saying, that Judaism, we have every type of Jew existing, right? So maybe the original Jews were from the Middle East. Right? Avram and Sarah were born in Mesopotamia, not in Israel, Iraq, okay? So, but where are we today? One might argue that the original Jews were maybe a darker complexion. While I don't know my full family history, I know we have Kohanim in our family, which means I, at least, even if there were converts in my family along the way, we come from the original Jews, because if you're a Kohen, right? Just by the way, the Lemba tribe here in Africa, who are black, they, in their DNA, they found the Kohen stream, I don't know what you call it, right? Pardon? Gene. Thank you. They found the Kohen gene. So you could be black or white. You could be a Sephardic, a Middle Eastern, or a Mediterranean, or European. You see what I'm saying? Even as a Kohen. And even if there's converts in your, even if your father converted, but your mother's side was Kohanim, so you're not a Kohen, but you have that gene in you. Right? So the problem with superimposing race on Judaism is that we have Jews of all types, and we have been dispersed throughout the world, and along the way, you'll have all types of Jews. You'll have Caucasian Jews, and you will have African Jews, and you'll have Asian Jews, and you'll have Chinese Jews, right? So, and of course, people could convert to Judaism, which can you convert to a race? Can I decide tomorrow I want to be black? I could paint my face from today to tomorrow, right? So Jewishness cannot be a race if we're a kaleidoscope of many races, right? It's impossible to say. So what about the saying that we are a culture? What about a culture? Are we a culture? Yes? Would you say it's a Jewish culture, or would you say within Judaism there's various cultures? Let me first just define the word culture for you. He's not defining who is a Jew. He is defining the fundamental principles that a Jew has to believe. So as Jews, and what if you don't believe in that? Are you not Jewish? That's really the point of today's discussion. So yes, we have the fundamental principles of Jewish faith that a Jew should believe. My question is then, are you not Jewish if you don't believe those things? That's why I'm trying to deconstruct this. So firstly, we're saying, are we a race? We have debunked the fact that we are a race because there are Jews of all races. Let's talk about culture before I put up culture here. Yeah. Let's just define culture first. Culture, it says, the customary beliefs, social norms, and material traits of racial, religious, or social groups. Okay? So let's talk about, can Judaism be a culture? Now obviously you see already from our slide presentation that there is no single culture for Jews because we have all types of Jewish cultures, right? Think about it. You have, I don't know, what single culture could you say that all Jews share? Some Jews have gefilte fish, and tzimis, and cholent. Some are, okay, that's already getting into custom. I'm talking about Moroccan Jews like spicy. I think, I'm very Ashkenazi, but I like the Moroccan foods. I just think that like somewhere along the way, and forget about I can't touch gefilte fish, and tzimis is not my thing, and pucha and borscht, just none of those. Somehow the Sephardic foods talk better to me. I think that's one thing Sephardim got right. So, my friends, think about it that way. Shakshuka imara, go for breakfast every day. I go for that better than herring and kishke, Okay, so do you like schnapps? Do you prefer vodka? Do you like whiskey? Right? Arak. Uzo. Baklava. Right? Thank God in our community we have thank God all cultures are catered for, and you could convert to a different culture if you really want to. Okay, maybe you prefer kugel and others prefer falafel. What type of music do you, by the way, Ronnie will play music for you at lunch today, right? You get a full concert here. And for those who are on Zoom, I'm sorry, you're not gonna get the concert on Zoom. That's exclusive to those. We have to have some advantages, some fringe benefits besides from my tzitzis here of coming to the in-person shir. So you get lunch, you get a concert during lunch. So Ronnie is very talented. He could give you Yemenite music. He could give you Middle Eastern music. He could give you Ashkenazic music, every Hasidic music. But obviously, the point I'm making is that we have all different types of cultures within Judaism. I can't forget about the bagels and lox. I heard that these days crime has gotten out of hand. Even bagels have lox these days. Sorry, my jokes ain't getting better than that. Let me ask you, what about, are we a nation? Jewish nation. Well, let's define nation. Nation, according to Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, a nation is a people having a common origin, tradition, language, and capable of forming or actually constructing a nation state. Now, granted, today we have the state of Israel. Thank God we've got Eretz Yisrael back since 1948. But majority of Jews don't live in Israel. While Israel, thank God, has the majority of Jews from any country, meaning there's no country in the world that has more Jews than Israel. Even America not, which wasn't the case probably even a decade ago. Israel has 20 times or 30 times more Jews than England. Sorry to disappoint you. But the idea is that there are British Jews. Very nice, Malcolm. There are British Jews. But most Jews are not British, I'm sorry to tell you. And there are French Jews too, you're right. But most Jews aren't French. Oh, and Australian Jews, although that I could agree, that most Australian Jews are South African. And there are American Jews, right? And Chinese, South African Jews. Did I ever tell you I was sitting in a restaurant in New York, a Chinese restaurant? That's one thing. One thing if people ask me I'm missing from America that we don't get in South Africa is kosher Chinese food. New Year's, I don't know what to do. And let me tell you, kosher Chinese food is out of this world. I don't know if Chinese people know what kosher Chinese food is, but somehow kosher Chinese food is out of this world. It's just divine. You don't get it here in South Africa, unfortunately. Pardon? Well, I was once sitting in a kosher Chinese restaurant in New York called Shanghai. And we were having a debate, my friends and I, if there's Chinese Jews. And I said, of course, you know how many Chabad houses there are in China? And you ever read that book, Bamboo Cradle? And we're debating about Chinese Jews. My friend can't believe there are Jews in China. Why would there be Chinese Jews? Can't be. Ni hao. I mean, you just don't. By the way, I was once riding on the subway, and there was a Chinese or Asian Jewish family. And the kid asks me, are you Jewish? I go, yeah, I'm Jewish. I go, funny, you don't look Jewish, they tell me. So here we're sitting in the Chinese restaurant debating if there's Jews in China. I said, why don't we ask the Chinese waiter who's serving us? So I asked the Chinese waiter who's serving us, and the Chinese waiter says to us, Ni hao, one minute I find out for you. So we figured maybe he himself doesn't know, I don't know what city, he comes from Wuhan. Maybe in Wuhan there's no Jews. There were South African Jews in Wuhan. I remember watching a video from one of the families they put out every day of what lockdown was like in Wuhan. Anyways, he comes back 10 minutes later holding platters of juices, and he says, we have cranberry juice, we have apple juice, we have orange juice, very sally, we now have Chinese juice. Of course, my friends, yes, we have Jews of all types. Israel is the Jewish homeland, but we Jews live in all countries of the world, and you don't have to be in Israel to be Jewish. And having Israeli residency doesn't make you Jewish either. In fact, there were over 1 million Eastern Europeans who moved to Israel who were not Jewish, right? Pardon? Yeah, lots of Christians and Muslims in Israel, and Baha'i, and Druze, and probably every nation, probably every religion. Druze? No. But you have Buddhists in Israel, and they're not Bujus. They're not Buddhist Jews. I'm talking, and they're not Zulus. You have Zulus in it, but they're not necessarily Zujus. You could be a Zuju. I ever told you the story about me and a Protestant guy on the plane? It's too long of a story. I won't tell it to you today. Kinnis HaShluchim 10 years ago. But my point, of course, is that can you say that we Jews are a nation while we have a Jewish state, and that's true? But many Jews are loyal citizens in other nations and countries. And you could be a South African Jew, you could be proudly Jewish and Zionist and South African, but you are not, right? It doesn't make you, just because you're Israeli, that's not what makes you Jewish. And just because you're Jewish, it's not what makes you Israeli, even though there is the law of return that gives you automatic Israeli. Pardon? Yes, absolutely. We certainly get picked on for the same exact things. Now, what about, this is the last one, and then I'm going to play a video for you to recap what we discussed so far. What about a religion? Can we say we Jews are a religion? Everyone here says we could say we're a religion? How do we define religion? Good. We're going to look in the Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary for that. The dictionary says, a cause, principle, or system of beliefs held to with ardor and faith. So, my friends, pardon? So we are a religion, you say. Well, let's debate this for a moment. Arguing for Judaism as a religion absolutely makes sense, like you say. But can you think of any curveballs to that? If you're saying the only thing that binds Jews throughout the world is the Torah and Jewish practices, so then perhaps indeed Judaism is a religion. Okay? But let me ask you, what percentage of Jews practice the Jewish religion? Huh? So how many Jews identify as Jewish but don't practice the Jewish religion? Does that make them not Jewish? They could still be very good Jews, okay? So if that's the case, there are millions of Jews who identify as Jewish, but we know that they are, still not religious. And that, of course, we're going to get there. We're going to discuss it. The whole purpose of this is to get you guys thinking and to get you guys excited a little bit. So let me ask you, of all the definitions that we gave of Judaism, which one, finally, makes the most sense to you of all these before I put on the video? Race, culture, nation, religion, or none of the above? What do you say, Ricky? You've been quiet. None. Okay. Stay tuned, my friends. Okay, lights out. We're going to watch this video and then we'll discuss it further.
What makes a Jewish person Jewish? Do you need a kippah, a necklace, synagogue membership? Do you have to do anything at all? Here's a myth buster. plenty of Jewish people have never seen a synagogue and have no clue about Jewish symbols, beliefs, traditions, or cuisine. But they are as Jewish as Moses. So, what's it all about? You see, we love to sort things into categories, create neat labels, and use those labels to help us understand our world a little better. Here are 4 popular ways of classifying people. Does being Jewish have to do with any of these? Are you Jewish because you belong to the Jewish race? Hold on, is there even such a thing as a Jewish race? Look at these images. These folks are all equally Jewish. Race doesn't appear to be a factor. Actually, non-Jewish people from the most diverse places and races can become fully Jewish. So we clearly can't define Jewishness as belonging to a specific race. Why don't we try culture? Are you Jewish because you follow the Jewish culture? Well, you might be, if there was a Jewish culture to follow. But there is no single culture common to all Jews. Here's why. The ancient Jews lived in the land of Israel for over a millennia, but they were forced into exile by the ancient Romans. That happened almost 2 millennia ago. Since then, Jews settled all over the globe. The result of Jews spending centuries in very different kinds of places was that they developed many very distinct cultures, including unique ways of dressing, unique foods, styles of music, prayers, practices, dialect, and celebrations. The result? There is no single uniform Jewish culture. So Jewishness is not based on culture. What about nationality? That's a legal term. It means that you belong to a certain country or state. If Jewish is a description of your nationality, it would mean that you are a citizen of a Jewish state. But that's not the case. We've got British, French, Italian, Turkish, South African, Swedish, Spanish, Argentinian, and Indian Jews. You'll find Jews in every country, and almost all of them are citizens only of the state within which they reside. Even the state of Israel includes millions of non-Jewish Israeli citizens. That pops the nationality argument, doesn't it? And here's a bigger buster. Historically, the Jews did not have an independent state for most of their existence as a people. Strike 3. Religion. That sounds good. Are you Jewish because you follow the Jewish religion? Well, no, because many Jews do not associate themselves with any religion. In fact, there are many Jews who do not even know they are Jewish. And there are also Jews who practice a religion other than Judaism. But according to Judaism, they are all equally Jewish. Phew, this is really tough. I guess it's time for the one and only Jewish answer. Being Jewish means that you have a Jewish soul. How do you get a Jewish soul? The most common way is through a Jewish mother. You see, according to Judaism, every child to a Jewish mother is naturally born with a Jewish soul. Your mother's race and nationality make no difference. She might follow the Jewish religion or culture, or she might not. But if she's Jewish, you're Jewish. And there's no opting out. If you're born a Jew, it means that God decided that you're meant to be Jewish for life. So if you're Jewish, thank your mom. Then there's conversion. If you were not born to a Jewish mother, but you complete the authentic and challenging Jewish process of becoming Jewish, God will give you a Jewish soul at the moment of conversion. So what can we take away from all this? It is the privilege and responsibility of each Jew to lead a Jewish life, but those who do not are authentically Jewish. Living the Jewish way allows your soul to shine, but it does not create your soul. That's already alive and kicking inside you, waiting for you to connect. So what is a Jew? It's a spiritual force within you.
All right, so ladies and gents, if it's in the matrilineal line, if your mother's Jewish, then you're Jewish. If your mother's Jewish, then you're Jewish. That's it. that doesn't count, unfortunately. In Judaism, it goes strictly by one's mother. So if one's mother is not Jewish, then one is not a Jew. They can convert to Judaism, as we know, but they themselves, they would have to go through the conversion process. Okay, I'm sorry, ladies and gents, I'm going to ask for no more interruptions because there's quite a bit of ground we need to there's quite a bit of ground I want to cover, and I will open the floor for questions, so we're going to do it then. Let's look at what Yair Rosenberg, right here, thank you, Rosalind. Well, what's wrong with this? This is a good card holder for you. For me. Oh, you're talking about for my book? I got 1 million of these upstairs. Don't worry, you keep it. You keep it. I didn't realize what you were saying. You keep it. I got lots of these upstairs. Just because I lose the page, just overwhelming. So let's read this text together, my friends. And this is from a journalist. His name is Yair Rosenberg, and he specializes in Jewish topics for various media outlets. And he wrote on this topic. And by the way, this particular article, he wrote it in response to an incident that happened a couple of months ago. You might remember when Whoopi Goldberg, remember Whoopi Goldberg? So she said on live television, her show, what's it called? The View, that the Holocaust was not about race, but it was about white people killing each other. She apologized for this. I like Whoopi Goldberg. I think she's a great personality. But sometimes people don't understand fully the context of situations, right? If you take if all you're left with is, if you take away the text from the context, then you're left with this con. So she understood and she apologized about saying such. But let's read his response. It's quite interesting. He says, while many people have trouble fitting Jews into their usual boxes, they don't know how to define Jews, so they resort to their own frames of reference, like race or religion, and project them onto Jewish experience. Maybe the only Jews who Whoopi Goldberg met were white. Now, ironically, that Whoopi Goldberg herself got a Jewish surname. She's Goldberg. So it's quite interesting. But perhaps the only Jewish people she met were in her media circles, and they were white, and she understood it as a race. But not realizing that we have Jews of every culture and race, right? So Jewish identity doesn't conform to Western categories, is what this Yair Rosenberg wrote back to her. He said, despite centuries of attempts by society to shoehorn it in, it just, that's the way it is. Now, he says this makes sense because Judaism predates Western categories. It's not quite a religion because one can be Jewish regardless of observance or specific belief. Einstein, for example, was proudly Jewish, but he was not religiously observant. But it's also not quite a race because people can convert in. It's not merely a culture or an ethnicity because that leaves out all the religious components. And it's not simply a nationality because Jews do have a homeland and many identify as part of a nation, but many do not. Many Jews, sadly, there are anti-Israel Jews. And it doesn't make them less Jewish. I mean, they're an abomination to us. We clash heads and we get to loggerheads with them because we say, how could you? But that doesn't disqualify them from being Jewish. So therefore, as the video very beautifully illustrated and recapped what we discussed, what is Judaism? What is the singular item that captures the essence of what it means, of what a Jew is? What was it? We said that if you want to know what is a Jew, Judaism itself tells us that it is the neshama, the soul, right? To be a Jew means that you have a Yiddish neshama. And this soul is conferred to you at birth, biologically, when you're born to a Jewish mother, or by conversion to Judaism, which is not just pay a fee and go, but rather, just a moment. So, I'll open the floor for questions. I just want to get my thoughts out. Okay. So once you get into this soul of Judaism, no matter what your beliefs or practices are, whether you do it or don't do it, whether you eat Ashkenaz or Sephardic, whether you visit Israel, etc., right? But the soul, that remains your essence. That's who you are. And that is a very important part that we have to keep in mind of what it means to be a Jew. So the first explanation we said so far, what does it mean to be a Jew? Well, it is the soul, the neshama. That's number one. It is the soul that makes us who we are. Now we're going to read a text which will be, here's a summary of it, that the soul is, we'll discuss what it means, what is the neshama. So I'm going to go back to that in a second. Let's read this. I'm going to read it to you from the teachings of the Rebbe. And this concept of soul, I think, is important for us to understanding why Judaism is biological, why you get it from your mother. If Judaism is a religion like any other, then that would mean it's a belief system, right? If you subscribe to the belief, you're part of it. Now, if that's the case, anybody could say they identify with the Torah's teachings, and I think we would have a lot more Jews out there. We wouldn't be such a small club, right? And maybe we would be small because maybe all those who don't believe, would also be excluded. Okay? So obviously Jewish identity is something that flows from the godly soul that pulsates within the person, whether they do or don't believe. Right? It's a metaphysical thing. It's not something that is, you're not going to see it in a scan. You can't go for an MRI and define and identify the soul. So it's not subject to the conventional human constructs of something that you could purchase. It doesn't work that way. God dictated that this is the way it works, that this particular neshama, a soul that is infused in certain bodies at birth. And obviously, when a person converts to Judaism, then that soul is given to them by God. It comes from the Almighty. I want to read this text together. Let's go to this text. Do you see it on the screen? A Jew's essence, okay? Says the Rebbe, Jewishness is not a casual feature of a Jew's identity. Rather, it is his or her very essence. Very interestingly, the Gemara says, when it comes to the term of a convert, it doesn't say a Gentile who converted to Judaism. Rather, it says, Ger shenis gayer, a convert who converted to Judaism. And what's interesting is, the Talmud explains, is that the person who converted to Judaism, even though yesterday they weren't Jewish because they weren't converted yet, but within them was always that spark, that soul that was waiting to be converted. So let's continue reading here. The status of a human, animal, or vegetable is immutable, declaring that one is no longer a human, that an animal really isn't an animal, or that a vegetable is no longer a vegetable is ineffective. You know the story about the kid who decided one day that he's a rooster? Yeah, you know the story? It's one of the stories of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, a beautiful fable. He says he decided he's a rooster. And the kid, he's now a little chicken, and he's no longer sitting with his family in the house. He's no longer wearing clothing, because chickens don't wear clothing, right? Chickens just are incontinent. They let themselves go where they want. Chickens just quack all day, and that's what he's doing. He's quacking. He's a chicken. Quack, quack, quack. Anyways, sorry, I can't make the right sound of a chicken. I apologize. I used to be able to make these sound effects. I abused my voice. My larynx can't handle it anymore. Well, nobody could help him. They brought every psychologist and shrink and everyone you can imagine. Nobody could help him. One day, a very wise person came. Usually they say it's a sagacious rabbi. I will say it was a venerable Rebbitzin. Whoever it was, it's only a parable. This individual came and said, I will solve the situation. And now she goes outside and sits with the kid, and she's a chicken. The kid says, what do you mean? How could you be a chicken? You're wearing clothing. And she says, what do you mean? Who says a chicken can't wear clothing? Not crazy, you can't be a chicken. And she's sitting out there and quacking with him. I'm also a chicken, right? And a couple of minutes later, the mom says that supper's being served. So she goes inside to eat supper. The kid said, how could you eat supper if you're a chicken? So who says a chicken can't eat supper? And so on and so forth until she managed to convince this kid, I'm going to sleep in a comfortable bed. But you're a chicken. Who said a chicken can't sleep in a comfortable bed? Why did I even tell you this story? But the point is, you can't change yourself to a chicken no matter. Okay, I have a better story that comes to mind. These are my childhood stories. This fellow decides, the church was offering $100 for anybody who converts to Catholicism. So he says, okay, I'll convert to Catholicism. Anyways, that Friday night, the priest comes and to check up on him and sees he's eating chicken. So what? In their version of Catholicism, I don't know anything about Catholicism. It's just the way I know the joke. They don't eat chicken on a Friday night. No meat, no beef. So the priest starts screaming at him, how could you say you have to give me back the $100? So what? How could I'm not eating beef. This is fish. So how could it be fish? He said, very simple. Remember when you dunked me into the waters and said that I'm a Catholic? I took this cow, after I bought it in Moshe's, and I dunked it into a little pot of water, and I said, you're now a fish. Like, obviously, we can't change this. Remember the story I mentioned last week from Maimonides about training the cats. They trained cats to be waiters, right? They put on them gloves and bow ties and tuxedos, and the cats were trained to become waiters. But when the mouse came out, all the cats dropped their platters of food. They ran after. That's what cats do. They run after mice. Can a leopard change its spots? Right? Even if a person will go so far to deny their own existence or the existence of the human species, they can't become the chicken, and it's just not going to work. And cats can't become human no matter how much you train them. It's not a question of free will. That was the context of discussion why I mentioned these stories last week, because we were talking about free will. We possess free will over our behavior, our action, our speech, our thought. Although sometimes we lose ourselves, free will is part of the human condition. But the part that we cannot change, that we don't have free will, is the way God created us, okay? Our very essence, our identity. So Judaism distinguishes between Jew and Judaism. You understand what I'm saying? You don't become a Jew just because you practice or believe as a Jew. Remember, there was a certain fellow who liked coming to our shul, and I don't even know why one of the guys gave him his hat, and this guy thought he's a Hasidic Jew now because he puts on a talis and a hat. In fact, I asked him to stop doing that because I said to him, that's not what makes you Jewish. So let's not do that, because now we're really confusing things. I don't like when you're pretending something you're not. Okay, the hat and the talis is not what's going to make you a Jew. The talis is what a Jewish male wraps around themselves to remind them about the obligation of the mitzvahs that they ought to keep. So until you have that obligation upon yourself, we don't want a superficial Judaism. You want it to be sincere, genuine, real, right? So then once you've actually accepted upon yourself the mitzvahs, you can eat bagels and lox, you can have gefilte fish or shakshuka, whatever you like, even if you're not Jewish. It's okay. But if you want to be Jewish, then you're going to have to do what Judaism requires. It's not just about a hat that you stick on your head. So you only become Jewish if you have that Jewish soul. And that's something you only get by birth, right? Or through conversion. Sincere, genuine conversion. Once you have that neshama, then you can't even stop being Jewish. That's irrespective of your practice or beliefs. Yesterday I met with a particular person. She told me that her mother converted to Judaism and her mother stopped practicing. I said, look, she's still your mother and she's still Jewish, even if she stopped. That just goes to show why our Beis Din has these particularly strict rules, because they want to make sure that it's for real. It's not just a flint, I'm in a mood, I'm in a mood of being something else tomorrow. This has to be for real. But ultimately, a Jew certainly believes in God, right? And a Jew certainly practices the mitzvahs and does everything that Jews are meant to do every single day. That is how we express our Judaism. But what happens if I don't practice it? Does that erase my Jewish soul? Does that negate my Jewish identity? To be a South African, you also have to follow South African laws. Does that make you un-South African? Actually, it makes you more South African if you break the law, right? So, excuse me? Ladies and gents, this is part of the fun here. So obviously, you're not going to lose your status as a Jew or as a South African just because you don't follow the law, even if you are in violation of the law. You know the story about we were once outside our shul looking for a 10th man for mincha. You know, sometimes we struggle with a minyan, believe it or not. So I see a guy walking by, and actually now he's become a regular. But back then I asked him, I said, "Are you Jewish?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "Will you come for the minyan, please?" He says, "No, I don't believe in God." I said, "Where is there any law that says that if you don't believe in God, you don't have to daven?" You could still daven even if you don't believe in God. She says, "No, I don't believe in organized religion." I said, "Tell me something. If we were organized religion, would I be standing out here still looking for a minyan, right?" Anyways, whether you practice it or not, whether you go to shul on Yom Kippur or don't, I'm reminded that this fellow was doing, just research in different religions and came into various houses of worship. What are you doing in the church? You believe in whatever, the Catholic beliefs? Yes, absolutely. Why else would I be here? He goes into a mosque and sits down next to one of the guys as he's prostrating. So you believe in Allah and Muhammad and everything. Of course, why else would I be here? Okay, good. Comes into the shul Yom Kippur, asks the guy sitting there in shul. So, you're Jewish? Yes, of course. You believe in God. So what, do I look like a rabbi to you? So what are you doing in shul? What do you mean? It's Yom Kippur. You know what I'm saying? So with Jews, it's a little different. To a good Christian going to church, this is, why else would I be there if I didn't believe in God, right? Why else would I be here? But for some reason, you could ask a Jew why they're in shul, and what do you mean? Even if I don't believe in God, it's Yom Kippur, I'm here. That's part of who we are. So perhaps that's because there's the essence, the pintaliyah, the soul, the neshama speaking. And that is the conscious layer of the Jew that recognizes a creator, and that's why they connect, even if they're not necessarily always observing and practicing and doing what a Jew has to do, because their Jewishness is not just defined by their race, by their nationality, by their culture, by their religious observance and practice. And that's why a Jew can never renounce their Jewishness, as I will put the text of the Gemara on here, regardless of how much they go adrift. And this is what the Gemara tells us. Even one who sins, afa pi shechata, Yisrael is still a Jew. Even if a person sins, they're still a Jew. Yes? Sorry, you got to speak up. We got to hear.
Basically, I married someone who married out of the faith, and we forced away, forced away very young. He was very different sexuality.
Yeah. So these are not halachas. Meaning it's not part of Jewish law that if a person marries out of the faith or doesn't live Jewishly, that they have to be buried in another part of the cemetery. These are local, call it social constructs, that were created by the South African Lithuanian Jewish community more than a century ago. They said, what can we do? Unfortunately, they found that there were Jewish people abandoning the Jewish faith for whatever reason. Maybe they didn't have good experiences. I don't know. I wasn't around here then. And the Beis Din then took these preventative measures, these, what do we call them, new deterrents that they created. They said, if you marry out of the faith, you're not going to get a Jewish burial. It doesn't say so in Jewish law, because a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. But they felt that this would create a deterrent. Maybe somebody would be scared off. Unfortunately, I don't know, maybe it worked 150 years ago, but Sadly, it doesn't seem to be working as a deterrent today. Yet our community still does that and still says that somebody who marries out of their faith will not be buried in the Jewish section of the cemetery. Yeah? But the point here is, the Gemara says very clearly that even a person who sins remains a Jew. And you could discard your nationality by surrendering your citizenship if you like, if that's what you want to do. Yeah, people do that. You can do all types of things, right? You could renounce your religious beliefs. You could change your culture. I like Sephardic foods. To me, that tastes good. But you cannot discard your essence. Judaism remains with you no matter what you do, no matter what you say, no matter what happens. And that's why I need to reiterate the fact that a Jew is required. Yes, you should practice your Judaism. Yes, these are things that Jews do and you should do it too. There's no such thing. So just because a person doesn't do it, they can't discard their essence. That's not something you could get rid of. Exactly, and that's not destructible. You cannot destroy the neshama. How would you say, indestructible? Yeah.
When I was a youngster, and people that weren't married out of the pipe, they buried them. The expression was they buried them in the hock.
In the huck.
Hock, H-O-K.
Okay.
That was the expression.
Right.
In the hock.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, Marty.
Rabbi, at which stage of modern life or historical life it was changed that who is a Jew is determined by the mother?
It's definitely predates the Mishnah long, long ago. I can't tell you at what stage it was, but I think it goes back to the very beginning, probably from Mount Sinai. So until Mount Sinai, it was certainly by the fathers, Yaakov and his children. At that stage, you were able to, that was different before the Torah was given. But I think once we got the Torah at Mount Sinai, your Judaism is determined and defined biologically by your mother. But the point, regardless of whether one converted to Judaism or they were born Jewish, just because a person renounces their beliefs, just because they stop, it's inconsistent with our essence of who we are. It's, a synchronized Jew is somebody who expresses their Jewishness through their behavior, through their beliefs. That's what it means to be Jewish. But failure to do so does not erase that identity. Once a Jew is always a Jew. It is something that is ingrained, it is embedded in who we are, it is our very essence. It's, you are, how would I say, it's engraved in you. A story I previously told you about Rabbi Weinberg. We once went on a trip and he went somewhere and I think he was a fundraising mission. He's been coming here since the 1940s. And when he came back to report to the previous Rebbe, maybe in the 30s even, in Poland, and he said that he gave the metaphor that he's like a scribe in times bygone, and even today, sometimes you have a traveling scribe. What do the Jews in the Kuru do? Today it's easy. You could FedEx it, you could send it over. But think about half a century or a century ago. If you lived out in a shtetl somewhere, and there was no full-time scribe in your town, then the scribe would come visit the town from time to time, and on this day they'll come check everybody's mezuzahs and tefillin and Torahs of the shul. And if there were letters that were cracked or broken, they'd fill them in. So Rabbi Weinberg said to this fellow that he's like the scribe, he's filling in the letters, he's trying to rejuvenate and re-inspire the Jew. When he gave this metaphor to the Rebbe said it's very nice. I'm talking about the previous Rebbe. But he said, it's not accurate. And since then, Rabbi Weinberg would relate the story that what he changed. He said, because letters of a Torah scroll, as holy as the Torah is, and it's a holy Torah scroll. Once the letters cracked off and faded, the Torah is no longer kosher. You know that. That's why the rabbi said, I'm fixing the letters. He said, no, you can never be unkosher. He said, rather, a Jew is like the letters in the tablets. The letters in the tablets are engraved. They are deeply embedded. Never can they be separated. They're always there. Nothing can change that, right? So when you write with a pen or a quill, which a Torah is written with, yes, it's true. It's two separate entities, the parchment and the ink. They're skillfully fused together, beautifully. But they're still separate entities, so it's possible for the ink to fade or crack or be erased even. But when it comes to something that's engraved, these letters that are engraved right here in these tablets that we have right here in front of us, like the tablets with which God gave us the commandments, right? They become part and parcel. They're penetrated, they're engraved into the stone itself. Nothing is superimposed upon them. Nothing can get in the way. Yes, there might be some grime, there might be some schmutz, some dust, some dirt that will get in the way and that will cover up the engraved letters. But if that happens, all you need to do, the previous Rebbe said to Rabbi Weinberg very clearly, is then your job is not like the scribe who has to rewrite the letters. All you need to do is to clean away the dust and the grime and the dirt, and the letters will reappear very clearly. So remember who we are. So, a Jew is a Torah scroll, yes, that's good, but not the written Torah scroll, the engraved one, like the Ten Commandments. And you don't have to rewrite it. Once a Jew, always a Jew, and it's always embedded in us. It is who we are. That is your DNA. So, obviously though, a synchronized Jew expresses their Jewishness through their behavior, through their beliefs. So, you don't have to believe in God to be Jewish, but yes, a Jew absolutely believes in God. That's what I would say. It doesn't delete, it doesn't diminish, it doesn't negate your status as a Jew. The very essence of a Jew is your neshama, which is always connected with God, and that is what we strive for, that is what we ought to do, and deep inside, the soul will always remain loyal to Almighty God, even though sometimes there might be some grime, something that gets in the way of it, but never lose sight of who we are. Now, of course, this is not the end of the story. The reality is that even though on the surface a Jew could claim that they don't believe in God and all types of claims that maybe they renounce their, right? And people could say all types of things. But as we have learned, we possess an inherently unique character that is the pintali, the soul, the neshama, that defines the essence of who we are. And if that's true, then it's impossible to shake it off. So you could protest all day that we don't believe, but deep inside and beyond the realm of conscious thought, our Jewish soul remains, and it is always going to be loyal to God. We know, I told you guys stories of how many stories of people who were willing to die al Kiddush Hashem, right? If you remember the stories I told you in the previous, a few weeks ago, about this fellow on Yom Kippur with the Blusheva Rebbe in one of the concentration camps. And I remember hearing another story about a particular Yid, I'm forgetting his name, I think Nathan. He was a German Jew who never practiced, never observed. And the Nazis, Yamach Shemam v'Zichram, they gathered all the Jews in the synagogue, and they made them take the Torah scroll out of the ark and to unroll it on the floor of the shul. They made Jews do this. And then these innocent souls, they said, now you're going to walk, you're going to march on your Torah scrolls. And all of a sudden, who stood up to the Nazis? Nathan, whose son survived and said his father was never a believer, was a self-professed, claimed atheist. And Nathan stood up to the Nazi and said, we Jews will never walk on our Torah scroll. And the Nazi shot him dead in his head, dead to the ground. And the son said, he witnessed his father, who never believed in God, but the Pintaliyid came out. The Pintaliyid came out. And that explains why there may be many Jews who maybe never set foot in shul, but they're uncomfortable walking into a church. If you ask them to kneel to a cross, right, they would inexplicably be forced to refuse. It's just, they can't do it. It's just part of who they are. And this is something we're going to read now in our final text for today. What? Yeah, but just a moment. I will break. We're running late and we have constant interruptions. And I'm asking, but since you interrupted already, I'll open the floor. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Ricky.
I don't know, I've heard this opinion that when it says if your mother's Jewish, you're Jewish, but apparently if for 5 generations each, they have a daughter, the daughter marries out and the husband either doesn't convert or is not allowed. Then doesn't end afterwards, it's actually it ends afterwards.
I've never seen such a thing, but the only thing I would answer to that is probably in today's day and age, you can prove if somebody's, I don't know about 5 generations, but in the past, Ricky, I don't think it was easy to truly prove somebody's mother's mother's mother 5 generations back could be Jewish. So it could be that there's a source that said such a thing. But I do believe that today's day and age, I don't know if we could go back 5 generations, but I have a feeling you can. And therefore, there's no reason to say so. So what Ricky was suggesting, he said he heard that one could terminate their Judaism, so to say, if for 5 generations, even if it's biologically proven maternally that one is a 5th generation Jew, but the family's never practiced. There's no halacha, there's no source that I know of that says one would lose their Jewish status. But I think, if one says my mother's 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 mother, prove it. How are you going to prove that your mother's 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 Jewish? If you have a proof, then great. And then you're Jewish. But if there's no proof, how would that proof be done? Usually through a ketubah. Usually through, right? But if the mother married a Gentile, so there's not going to be a ketubah. And the grandmother married a Gentile, so there's not going to be a ketubah. How are you really going to empirically or really, really prove? They're still Jewish. If one's mother married a Gentile, and her mother married a Gentile, and her mother was married to a Gentile, as long as it's an unbroken chain of maternally of Jews, then they're all still going to be Jewish. Yeah. All right, let's conclude with this text. I want to even discuss it for a minute or two. So let's look at this idea. All right, what the Alter Rebbe says here, and this is that we can never separate ourselves really truly from God, even on pain of death, like the stories that I said. We read this text quickly. This is from chapter 18 in Tanya. And the Alter Rebbe says, even the most irreverent and sinful Jews typically surrender their lives to sanctify God's name. They are prepared to suffer harsh torture rather than denounce the one God, even if they are morally uncultivated, uneducated, and ignorant of God's greatness. Even concerning the little that they do know, they give it little serious thought. So they aren't giving up their lives as a result of intellectual appreciation or deep thinking about God. Instead, without any intellectual appreciation or careful thinking, they give up their lives, for they consider it impossible to betray the one God despite lack of reasoning. Now, I know that it's hard to believe and relate to these situations, but I think when push comes to shove, what is that expression? There's no atheist in a foxhole. You know what I'm saying? Right? It's a cliche for a reason, right? Because there's an element of truth to it. Because there's something deep inside that just doesn't allow one to denounce or renounce who they are. Right? So that's the thing. Just like a drowning person might grasp as, they're trying to, whatever it could to save their life. So might an atheist turn to God in the foxhole, even if they don't believe in God, right? Now, is that faith? Or is that actions of a person in despair? What do you say? Well, what have I got to lose, right? But the Alter Rebbe, he tells us, he says, no. He's not saying that an atheist turns to God when they're in danger. Now, what is the Alter Rebbe saying here? Even the most irreverent and sinful Jews typically surrender their lives to sanctify God's name. That's what he said. He's not saying that the atheist is only doing it if they're in danger, I'm in despair. Okay, God help me, fine, I confess you exist. The Alter Rebbe is saying that the atheist invites danger. You hear that? This Nathan said to the Nazi, we Jews we're not going to walk on our Torah scroll. You're not going to compel us to do that. No way. Hey, he's a guy who didn't believe. Why would he stand up to that? There's something deep inside. So he's saying if they don't believe in God, why would they mind denouncing God to save their life? Right? So, obviously the point, who's playing stuff out there, distracting what's going on? Yeah, please. You know, they have to be understanding that there's a shear going on. You don't just play stuff. So the point is, when the atheist is in danger, it might seem like an act of despair, but the Alter Rebbe is saying no, that you invite the danger into your life. Okay? And the obvious conclusion is that despite their feeling otherwise, there's something deep inside. There's a pintaliyid. Deep down, somewhere beyond conscious thought, their soul continues to believe. And that's what makes, what's that? Exactly. You could run, but you can't hide. Exactly. And that, I think, is the point that we will conclude with today, is exactly this very idea that, the long and sometimes sad history of our people demonstrates just how true this actually is, right? With many of the biggest non-believers actually being prepared to die rather than to denounce their belief in God. And, this is just something of, you just can't shake off that faith. It's part of who we are. So, this is the point. And with the knowledge, just a moment, lunch is not yet served till we're done, that the faith, okay, Zakazant, that the faith is really there, we have to get in touch with that faith and to try to realize, that even if there's no threat of execution, maybe like people faced with the Nazis, okay? Maybe we're not in dire circumstances, but it's still there. We still have it inside. And maybe we'll talk more about this, please God, at our next shiur. We'll get more into the detail of how to feed this faith that all of us have. So the point is, and this is an idea that needs more elaboration, but we're time to conclude already, is that the soul sees God and therefore believes with absolute faith that God exists. So how do we nurture that belief? That's something we need to talk about a little bit more, and please God will do that. So to conclude today, do I have to believe in God to be Jewish? What do you say? Well, Jewish identity is not contingent on belief in God, right? But on the soul that we possess. And therefore, regardless of one's professed lack of belief, I think ultimately we all believe deep inside. Yeah. All right, we'll continue this discussion next time. Thank you all for joining us. Monday morning, please God, we will look at, is it kosher to have doubts about God? Join us then. All the best. Tomorrow morning, Miriam will be here. Please God, come.